Welcome, new and old friends. My name is 2482, and today 42 got us 3 stories. We're gonna call this a Sugar Special, cause all the stories are written by Sugar-Soad. So, turn off your lights, make sure your doors and windows are locked. Things are about to get spooky. They told me they had towed it as it was blocking the pavement, and they wouldn't release it until the following Monday. I begged them, give me back my son in his wheelchair, but they just pointed out that I should have read my lease more thoroughly. I keep killing my roommate every night, and he wakes up the next morning as if nothing has happened. By Sugar-Soad. I, a 36 male, ended up having to sign a lease and move in with a complete stranger named Adam almost a year ago. Adam, a 33 male, was a bit unusual, but we got along okay at the start. He was a bit too strict about chores and would constantly use my belongings without permission. We ended up having a massive argument, and I just lashed out in anger and punched him in the face. I remember watching in slow motion as he fell backwards and hit his head off the table. It was very clear that his neck had snapped, as it shouldn't have bent at that angle. I quickly ran to my room and hid. I don't think that I would sleep, but somehow I drifted off. I awoke the next morning and was terrified to walk out of my room as I knew what awaited me. I eventually plucked up the courage and let out a scream as I saw him sitting at the kitchen table eating his breakfast. He looked at me confused and asked if I was okay. I just stood there with my mouth agape until he finally left the apartment. I convinced myself what happened was a dream, as it was the only explanation. That night when he came home, we ended up talking about some random stuff and actually enjoyed each other's company for the first time. I found out we had a lot of common interests. We opened a bottle of whiskey that I had gotten as a bonus for my work and started drinking away. I got a bit too drunk and decided to try something out. I walked into the kitchen and grabbed the sharpest knife we had. I could see the shock on Adam's face as I plunged a knife in his chest repeatedly. I will admit that I got a bit carried away and stabbed him over 100 times. I walked to my bedroom and couldn't wait to see what tomorrow would bring. I woke up the next day and yet again Adam was fine. I realized I could live out my deepest, darkest fantasies, and no one would ever know. Every night, I watched the life leave his body as I used another method to kill him. It became like a ritual that I did just before I went to sleep. Imagine every depraved act you have ever wanted to commit against someone. Well, I inflicted them all on him. I honestly never thought of myself as a sadistic person, but I knew that there would be no consequences for me. The most fun one was when I ran a lawnmower across his body and watched as his screams were cut off as his face was ripped open. I came home one evening and decided to take the night off from killing him, as I was exhausted after a long day at work. I sat down on the couch and just tried to relax. I could see that Adam was giving me a few weird looks, but just ignored him. I saw him shrug before walking away into the kitchen. I had forgotten about him until I felt him stab a fork into my eye. I began to scream in pain as Adam said, "I guess it's my turn now," before running a knife across my neck. I screamed myself awake the next morning and ran to the mirror to find no trace of injury that I had incurred the previous night. Adam smiled at me when I walked out of my room and said he hoped I had a good night's sleep. I ended up moving out of that apartment the following weekend as I couldn't sleep while he was nearby. I thought of everything I had done to him and lived in fear that he would do something similar. This is why I have lived on my own since, as you never know what your roommates are capable of. I decided that I could murder him and then claim self-defense as none could prove that he hadn't tried to kill me. I plunged the knife repeatedly into his stomach and watched as the life left my newborn son's body. There is a reason that Irish people wear green on St. Patrick's Day, by Sugar-Soad. You have probably heard of this tradition where Irish people wear green on St. Patrick's Day. It is considered bad luck not to wear something green that day. I am fully Irish, and a couple of years ago, I mistakenly forgot. A couple of people pointed out to me, but I just laughed it off. An old woman approached me and told me to go home and hide before they come looking for me. I just walked away from her as she was clearly out of her mind. I ended up having a great night except for the fact that the old woman kept gazing over at me. I stumbled home drunk after the pub kicked us all out and crawled into my bed while praying that my hangover wouldn't be too severe tomorrow. At about 4 in the morning, I was awoken by a thunderous crash downstairs. I reached for my baseball bat that I used as a child and carefully made my way downstairs. I froze on the second to last step as I gazed around my living room. Dozens of tiny little men dressed in green were smashing up the place. I took 2 steps forward as they noticed my presence. They charged at me and I didn't have time to defend myself as they overwhelmed me. I collapsed to the floor under their weight and let out a scream of pain as they began to bite into my skin. Their teeth were incredibly sharp and they easily ripped into my flesh. I managed to get one of my arms free and swung the bat and knocked a few of them off of me. The rest moved back and began circling me, waiting for me to make a mistake. There was blood dripping from their mouths and I could see pure hatred in their eyes. I tried to stand, but my right leg could barely support me due to all the bites it had taken. I was starting to get lightheaded as I had probably lost a lot of blood due to those little monsters. I was trying to decide what to do when they came at me once again. They had grabbed makeshift weapons from around my home, and they were trying to use them to incapacitate me. My right leg gave way as one of them sliced the back of my heel with a knife. I was down on one knee and could barely move due to all my injuries. They moved back and one of the leprechauns moved forward and gave me a look of unbridled disdain. He looked me up and down and turned to one of his comrades and muttered something in a strange language. His comrade rushed outside and came back holding a green suit. The suit was then thrown in front of me. The head leprechaun kept pointing at the suit and then at me. It was obvious he wanted me to put it on. I quickly stripped off what little I was wearing and prepared to put it on. I almost screamed as I tried to put on the trousers as excruciating pain went down my leg. I looked inside the trousers and saw dozens of sharp razors hidden inside. I begged the leprechauns to let me go, but they just kept pointing at the suit. I knew I had little choice and began to put the clothes on. There were hidden blades in every piece of clothing, and I couldn't move without getting pierced by one blade or another. My entire body felt like it was on fire as the suit ripped into my flesh in numerous places. After I finally finished putting the suit on, I gazed down to see the suit now looked crimson due to all the blood that was on it. The leprechauns smiled at me before clapping their hands and disappearing. The suit vanished with them, so I stood there half naked with blood covering most of my body. I have learned from that day to always wear green on St. Patrick's Day and urge you to do the same. She pleaded with me to stop as I shoved the hoover into the hole in her stomach and then began to suck out the excess fat. I kept reassuring my 4-year-old daughter that everything was going to be okay, and this would help her win the pageant. You should never piss off the Toy Story characters at Disneyland Paris. By Sugar-Soad. I was that one annoying kid in school who would always take the joke a little too far. I loved being the center of attention, and I didn't care if I looked like an idiot while doing so. I know now that most of the people laughing were probably laughing at me and not with me. For our school tour, we were going to Disneyland Paris, which was really exciting. I live in Ireland and there are very few theme parks here, apart from Teod Park, obviously. I had a small group of people that I thought of as friends, but we were probably just a bunch of losers that hung out together. None of them were going on the trip, so I was a little worried I'd have no one to hang out with. There was an odd number of people going on the trip, so I ended up having a room by myself as no one wanted to share with me. I pretended like I was fine with it, but it hurt a little bit. I was beyond excited when we reached Disneyland and couldn't wait to try out the rides. My classmates quickly broke off into smaller groups and I was left by myself. The teacher gave me a sympathetic look, but they moved off to do their own thing. I started wandering the park and enjoying myself. I did see some of my classmates running around and having the time of their lives. I tried desperately to keep a smile on my face and not burst into tears, but it was difficult. I rounded a corner and saw a load of people dressed up as the Toy Story characters. They were entertaining a bunch of small children and parents who were cheering them on. I watched for a minute or so and then came up with a fun idea. I yelled out, "Andy is coming!" and all of the characters threw themselves to the ground. I heard that the actors are meant to do this as a way of staying in character. The children all started giggling and a few of the parents gave me appreciative smiles. After a minute, the characters all got up and continued their act. I had an evil glimmer in my eye at this point and yelled out, "Andy is coming!" I laughed out loud as the characters fell to the floor once again. The parents were not as amused this time with my antics. I did this another 5 times, and by this time I was getting death glares from the parents, as I was spoiling the fun for their children. I eventually stopped as I was getting bored, and I wanted to check out the rest of the park. I moved away and went on to the nearest ride. It was a roller coaster and I really loved it. When I got off, I noticed the Buzz Lightyear character looking at me. I don't know how I could tell, but it felt like he was looking at me with a look of hate. I quickly walked away as he was starting to creep me out. Over the next few hours, there was always a Toy Story character watching me from a distance. No matter how fast I moved, there would always be one a few feet away. I started to panic at this point and decided to hide from them. I found a nice secluded corner and ducked down out of sight. The sound of merriment in the distance slowly faded as I felt my eyelids getting heavier and heavier. I woke up to pure silence and pushed myself up. I started to panic when I discovered it was nighttime as we were meant to be back at the hotel hours ago. The park was eerily quiet, and I couldn't see anyone in sight. I was practically running as I went off in search of someone. I eventually spotted a group of people off in the distance and began to make my way towards them. They all seemed to be crouching down over something, but I couldn't tell what it was. My heart sank as I realized it was the Toy Story characters I was approaching. I very carefully made my way forward to get a better look at what they were doing. There appeared to be an animal laying on the ground in front of them. Suddenly, the Woody character lifted his head, and I saw his mouth was soaked in blood as he swallowed some blood-soaked meat. I came to the sinking realization that they were not wearing any masks, and that they actually had the faces of the Disney characters. I finally got a better view of the ground and saw that what they were eating was a security guard. His stomach had been ripped open, and they had been feasting on his intestines. I tried to move away as silently as I could, but then cursed myself as I backed into a bin. All of their hate-filled eyes now locked onto me. Every time I would take a step backwards, they would take 2 forwards. The security guard's blood was dripping onto the ground and leaving a trail behind them as they inched towards me. I turned and bolted away and could hear their steady footprints falling behind me. No matter how fast I ran, they would always be close behind. I had no idea how they kept up as they were only walking and I was running. I began to tire very quickly as I was in the best shape due to being very lazy. My sides were hurting and I could barely breathe. I turned a corner and froze after discovering it led to a dead end. I turned around to go another way and froze as the characters had blocked off my retreat. They were even more terrifying up close as I could see their razor-sharp teeth in their mouths that were dripping with blood. They began to advance towards me, and I knew there was no escape. An idea popped into my head, and I yelled out, "Andy is coming!" A wave of relief washed over me as they collapsed to the ground. I spotted a gap and started to run between them. I fell to the floor as an arm shot out in a vice-like grip latching onto my ankle. I looked back to see Mr. Potato Head character crawling towards me with his arm still holding onto my leg. I kicked him in the face a few times until his grip released. I spent the next few hours constantly running from them. They would always catch up with me and I would always have to yell "Andy is coming" to have any chance of escaping. It was starting to get bright when they once again cornered me. I could hear noises in the distance and knew the park was starting to open up. I screamed, "Andy is coming!" and prepared to move past their fallen bodies. I felt an excruciating pain in my leg and looked down to see Woody had bitten into my leg. I reached down and began to punch him in the face as hard as I could. His mouth opened and I watched as he started to chew on a piece of my leg that he had ripped off. I was barely able to walk at this point and my wounded leg was dragging behind me. I let out a scream of joy as I rounded a corner to find a number of employees coming towards me. They rushed over to me and immediately started tending to me. I saw the Toy Story characters in the distance watching me, and I felt like they were trying to see what I would say. I lied to the staff and told them that I had fallen asleep and then cut my leg on something. I could tell by the looks that they were giving the creatures that they knew what really happened. I was reprimanded by my teachers when they collected me. They eventually stopped giving out after I pointed out that they had left me behind and hadn't noticed. It's been years since that incident, and now I have my own children. I must have buried the memories as my children had asked me to go to Disneyland Paris, and I happily agreed. I only remembered what happened as I gazed at the Toy Story characters and their smiles widened to show their razor-sharp teeth. I slowly took a few steps backwards while holding my youngest as a shield, as they seemed to recognize me. I let out a scream of anguish as I walked into the house to find his body gently swaying back and forth. My 7-year-old son had repeatedly told me he was being bullied at school, but I hadn't realized until now how much it had actually affected him. Now don't panic or 42 might bite, cause our video is coming to its end. I'd like to thank Sugar-Soad for letting me read his stories. I hope you enjoyed them as always, my friend. Now if you enjoyed these stories and this video, hit that like button and make sure it feels it. If you're new, subscribe and turn that pretty little bell to all notifications. If you'd like to help this channel/podcast, just share it with anyone who might enjoy it. But if you're on Apple Podcast, give me a 5-star review and leave me a comment. It would really help me and I would really appreciate it. If you'd like to help in other ways, I do have Patreon, merch, and PayPal. Now last but never least, let me get you that Sunday word so you can leave me a comment down below or on Twitter. Last week's word was cruelty, and on screen right now and up on Twitter are all the comments I got last week. Thank you, every single one of you. And I better hurry on to this Sunday's word, which is emergency, which means a serious, unexpected, and often dangerous situation requiring immediate action. So, it's an emergency that you go into the comments and write me a sentence. Or, as I said before, go onto Twitter, @ me, and use this word, and you'll be on next week's video/photo. But as always, guys, thank you for watching and listening. It really means the world to me. Sleep tight, and don't let 42 bite.